Okay. All right. So getting distracted by people coming in. All right, so February 11th, we have these blooming envelopes. It's flowers on envelopes with Violet Smythe, and that's a free program. It's a Sunday, and in Pacific time, it's 1 to 4 p.m. And if you can't dial in because of your time zone, you can catch it on recording. So please feel free to register. And next month for this Roman study group, Beth Lee will present. She's going to do her built up capitals. And I will say we're also working on a full workshop with Beth. She's developing one for built up capitals. So the Inland Empire group is looking to schedule that for later in the year. And our next workshop with San Diego chapter is Victor Cam's, that's full. In March, though, we still have spots in calligraphy, rhythm, and a spark of gold. And that Andrea Wunderlich is always a very fun teacher and very informative. She has topics and ways of teaching them that other people don't. So that's one to consider. And then in April, Gothicized Italic with Nina Tran. That is San Diego. Nina taught this topic for Inland Empire 2 or 3 years ago, and we liked it so much that we have a lot of new members, so we're scheduling that for the San Diego chapter. And so go ahead and check out our calendar, and you'll see what else is going on for the year. And I do want to mention, some of you have probably seen the email that went out. We are this is as of today, February 2nd. I know it's not February 2nd for all of you still. Some of you, I think, are February 3rd already. But February 2nd is our anniversary, 50th anniversary for the Society for Calligraphy. And we were the first calligraphy guild in the US. Other guilds followed right behind us. And we're having a big celebration all year long. So you'll hear more about that, and we will keep you informed. Many of these will be in person, but we will have a virtual exhibit in addition to an in-person exhibit. Okay, so with that, I think we can go ahead. I'm going to talk about ligatures. But what I want to say is this is going to be more than one session. I really would like to show ligatures from historical work in other countries, Rome, Sweden, or was it Norway? I think it was Sharon Sowell sent a bunch of pictures from Norway. It wouldn't all fit in. We have a 1-hour lesson and it would not all fit in. And I sent you an exemplar that is from Pedro Gonzalez. He did this years and years ago. It's no longer even featured on his website or his social media. I think he's moved beyond this. He did this in, I think, 2002, and he's a typographer. So he's got 22 years of work past this. So but what I wanted to just show you this as an example, and we can talk about those. I also have notes on other ligatures, and then I want to talk about different ligatures that aren't on this sheet. There are other really fun ones. So we'll go through as many as we can, and I thought that we could make our own exemplar. And I'm going to do mine with skeleton Romans. Those are my favorites. But I will show you some I did with broad edge later.
Kristi, sorry to ask, but what are ligatures?
Ligatures are joins. So, An ampersand is a ligature. That is, I'm gonna move my camera up a little, sorry. An ampersand is a ligature. It was originally, it meant, I think and per se was what it meant years and years ago. And those characters from Latin were put together and turned into an ampersand. So that is one character that is made from a ligature. But if you look at these, let me get this. This is both ligatures and nesting. And the reason I love these is I really love playing with the Sherry Thornton style pieces. And there are other pieces you'll see. If you need to fit something in on a line, that's where ligatures come in handy. So you can have, let me do one right here, UL. Normally you'd have a space in between those, and in Romans it's a pretty good size space, but there they are, just turned into one space. Let me turn on my light here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's all of these where they are joined together, those are ligatures. And a favorite one of mine, let's see if it's on here. I'm looking for O. And I do not see O. So that's why I said I will cover some additional ligatures, but a favorite one that I saw originally in a book by David Goins, who recently passed away. It was an O, and his was in an italic book. It was an O, and then a K or an R. Let's an R or a K attached. And I just in calligraphy, I really loved the way that looked. Can you all see that? I think I'll switch to pen so it'll show up a little better. O, and then the R was just joined. That's a common ligature, and I don't see it on this sheet that I gave you. So that's, again, we'll go over some of these different ligatures. So what I want to do is we want to walk through these and we can create an exemplar together. And we'll start with the common ones, and then we'll move on to some of those that are not shown here. And as I said, this may take more, well, it will take more than one session to do ligatures. And when I went to, some of you know, I used to work in Europe for about 4 years. And on the weekends, we would just go somewhere. And one weekend we went, for 2 weekends, we went to Rome. And my favorite thing was the Colosseum. Everybody talks about the Trajan column, but at the time you could not get up to the Trajan column. It was scaffolding, and they blocked it off. People were taking rubbings, and you can see Father Katich's rubbings, but if everybody and his brother took a rubbing, eventually that stone is going to rub away. Also, they have to worry about vandals, etc. So that you can't get right up to the Trajan column. But in the Colosseum, they have stones everywhere, which were done by not so professional looking stone carvers. They were just the most fun, funky carvings, and you see a lot of ligatures in those. And that, I think, began my love of ligatures. Also, when one weekend I went to Cologne, Germany, and we've discovered that right under the city hall is a Roman museum, and they have stone carved signs under there. in that museum that have a lot of nesting, and I was quite taken with that. So they'll put a letter inside. So here's a CH, and you wouldn't put, C would never be the letter that follows H. It's the one going around is always the first letter, and the one being nested is the second letter. That helps you read the word. But you will find all kinds of samples of nesting, and I will show those in a future session. Okay, so let's walk through some of these, and I have some notes here. We'll go through these that we see, but then I also have notes on lists of ligatures, and if we have time today or in a future session, we will go through those lists and make sure we have samples of all the ligatures. And sometimes I'm going to show you multiple ways of writing these. So here's an AA, and what they did, they're just trying to fit things in. And I'm going to show you some from work I did in a class with Risa Gettler. And I'm not going to worry here about getting the perfect proportions. I'm more worried right now about showing you the ligatures. I took a class with Risa Gettler, and we made a lot of use of ligatures to fit things in. The rows had to be perfectly lined up, justified on both right, left and right. And so that's where these kinds of things come in very handy, and they're very fun if done properly. Okay, so this AA here, or so I just touched them, but if you look at the one on the sample, it can actually be partially overlapping. And that is not one that I've noticed a lot, but you know what? I may not have been looking. If I actually kept my eyes open for that, I might see it. And so after this, I think I will be when I'm going through the historical examples. Now, the things that I have used recently, you can do an A like this, and then you could do the next letter, B. Okay, but it looks kind of funny. That's not my favorite. So what I often see are square top A's. And I'm not putting the serifs on that Pedro put on his. And then, so this one's still slightly slanted. And actually, I should be doing the lower and the upper the same height. So next one I will. Okay, so that's still slightly slanted. It looks fine, but you might see one where it's, let's say, barely slanted. And you might have a serif there and barely slanted. And then here's your B, and I'll do the proper proportions on that. So that's one way to fit more in A and B. And obviously, then you can do that same kind of thing. And you could have a smaller, it doesn't have to be that fat. That's really a fat one. Maybe a little slimmer. Although an A, if I were doing standard Romans, it would be wider. But a lot of times when you're doing this stuff, you might be doing some fun narrow Romans. Whoops, I did a B, but I meant to do a D. Sorry, right here, D. Okay. And you can do a really rough draft. Some people do perfect exemplars right off the bat, but for most of us, we can do a really rough draft, and then later we can go out back when we want to and make it neater, but even if it's not finished, it will make a great reference. And please feel free to ask questions at any point. Okay, so now we're doing AE. And let me just demo something else that Pedro does that I have seen done. You might have, I'm going to exaggerate here, you might have a really angled entry and then a straight. So there's your A and here's your F. And that's one I like. And it doesn't even have to be, let me do the next one. It doesn't even have to have that flat top. So, but if I'm not going to have a flat top, I really need to angle it so it still looks like an AH. And depending on what you're doing, you might have some serifs in there. All right.
Do you ever put the crossbars like straight across both letters?
You know, it has been done and you can see it in the sample. So that's up to you. An A is usually lower, but it is done. Just like in this sample that Pedro did. So we can do that here. And maybe then you'd do it in the center because an H is usually just above center and an A is below. So you wouldn't do it as high. And in fact, I think if I were going to do that, I probably would just put it a little low for the H. It's higher than an A would normally be, but a little lower than an H would usually be. So that's something to play with. If you look at Pedro's, his are fairly high. So these are things you can alter to suit what you want to do. And if I look at Pedro's, let's see, his A's, he's got them in the right spot when he does just an A. Just for some of his ligatures, he moves them. All right, so K, let's just do this so you can get it onto your sheet. And I'm kind of sticking with, I think maybe I'll do this and a slight little flat top. And then I'll do the K. And I'll do it the same level like he does. It is a nice look for this to do that at the same level as the K. And then, and so what you don't do is an I, because if you tried to put an I here, well, there's your I. And even if you put serifs there, it's just not going to read as an AI. So you don't do that with an I, but you do it with other letters that have features that distinguish them. So I'm going to do an L. And what I might do if I was doing Sherry Thornton style, I might put a ligature or a serif on there just to really make that stand out as an L. And then he's even got the M. So usually if I did an M, I would usually have a slant here. It's a slight slant. But because you're putting it with a letter that slants the other way, you're going to make those two straight. And I have seen it done different ways. And if you can see it on his, you could do it straight up and down, or you can put your, and that's a little too slanted, but you can put that there. A-M. it probably reads best. Let's try it both ways. Here's an A. And here's an M, and I'm gonna do it straight sides. But you know, if I did straight sides, it probably doesn't go with the rest of my Romans. So I most likely would do it with the slight slant. Then an M really does have a slight slant, not a huge one. A W has a big slant going in. M is a slighter slant. All right, and then the same, well, N has the straight sides, so here you go. And really an N should be a little wider than that, so let me just redo that a little. Okay, here's your A, and just depending on what you're doing with your letters, you might have some serifs in there for the fun of it, or you might not have the serifs there. And the P, and I'm putting this real slant, strong slant, but if you notice Pedro's, his is not quite as strong a slant. And then here's my P. This one, if you look at Pedro's, his comes down further, but he moves his A up just because he's doing that with these ligatures. I would not make a P come exactly halfway. And if you look, I did put out the structure. The P comes below the halfway point. So just if I do a P, it comes a little further down. And so I could either put my A low, let's try that, how that looks. I'd put my A about there, and then the P would come down here. It's up to you what works for your situation. I do kind of like the way Pedro did it with the A a little higher because he's making his A's higher. I made some of them lower, but he's making all of his higher. So that's a design choice of yours. And then the R, that pretty much follows what we did with the P. Except that your R could be a little, your top could be a little shorter, but it still comes down. Okay, and then you could make your A even. And then his A and his V. So here's his A, and then here's his V. And again, he puts it about halfway for what he's doing. Normally I put it lower. And he has his serifs on there, which you may or may not have based on your use, but you can definitely see that's an AV. And so the main thing is you want readability here. Let's say this was the word avenue. Let me actually just write this out so you can see how that looks. There are design choices here because you could go E. You could make that 3 ligature letters, but you know, it's getting a little harder to read. And then you'd put your N in there. And your U, I probably would not ligature it here, but you could. But you could do this. Or you could make your U like this. It should be a little wider than that. And really, the U should be more like this. And I bring my line down. And there's my E. So I think with those 3 letters, it's a little harder to read as avenue. And especially my spacing, I would redo it with better spacing, but you have to be careful when you have more than 2 ligatures. Just think about it. Is it going to be readable? And often if you've got 3 in a row, it's not. One thing we did in Risa's class is we ligatured the word the into one ligature, and it was not that readable. You could read it, but not, and I'll at some point show that. All right, any questions? So there's the A ligatured letters. Now, of course, you could do the same thing, AW. I'll do that real fast. And then probably I wouldn't ligature the next letter. I'm writing the word ah. And I would do that as a separate letter. But these all save space, because if I wrote this one without the ligatures, it takes up this much more space, which is not that much. Well, this was a much wider E. Let's say if I had the same wide E, it takes up more space. Maybe with one word, that's no big deal, but if you're writing quite a few letters, words on a line, it makes a big difference as you get through the line. And Margaret's asking if I'll be covering stacking, and we will cover stacking, but probably not right away. If you have any specific things, Margaret, let me know. We'll do the nesting and the stacking separately. I should have mentioned stacking. And I think when we wrote the in Risa's class, I think part of it was stacked. All right. So what he shows on here, all his C's are nested. And I can show you some other ways that we can actually ligature C's, but they won't be as round as this. Let me just quickly, I'm not going to go through them all right now, but if you had, let's say the letter U, and let's say I did this style, you could do a kind of squarish C. And it just depends. Does that fit into what you're doing? If you want the really round C, then not so much. You could touch, but this is more what we see, where you use the back of the C, you straighten it more to butt up against a straight letter before it. And we don't see that on Pedro's, but those are ligatures I see occasionally. And then it shows some overlapping. He's got his D's, his rounded letters, D, C, D, O. I don't see those very often, but I can imagine that they would work if you're doing a piece where you need more space. What we did in Risa's class is we did those lines over and over, because some of the lines had a lot of words and they were preceded by a line that had many less words, and I had to make those fit both within the same margin. So I was coming up with everything I could to make that second line shorter. And that's where these kinds of things would come in handy. But I won't talk about those there. You can see them there. Okay, and here it shows an E where he just brings the crossbar through, so two E's closer together, but you could still, that's not really saving a whole lot of space, I think, because making this a little taller than this is more of a cosmetic thing because it's the same amount of space. Unless you just really, they do save a slight bit, they move it closer. And then they just brought this through. So it does save a smidgen. And the same with the F and the E. And then they show this one, which I haven't seen this one before. That's what I really like about this. Gwen, thanks for sending this and sharing it. She found it online and I was not able to find it online. But here's an F and then the next F, and he has a serif and then just brings the top line through. He doesn't bring the next line through. And his crossbar and his F is a lot higher than when I learned. When I learned, it's just under halfway. His are much higher. But you know what? You'll see Romans all different variations. Then he put some serifs on there on his. And then you see he does that with the H. Here's your F. And then he just continues it out to form a serif on his H. And I have my F down here, but he put his at the same level as the H. So I'm just gonna except that I was so intent on doing that, you don't have two ligatures, you'll never be able to read that. So let me do, here's an F, I'm gonna put it at halfway, and then here's the H, and he just nestles it in there very closely, and then he follows up on the top one, and he has the break, and that makes it more readable, a lot more readable than this. And then ET, and that's really the initials that were put together for ampersand. Some of the ampersands you'll look at, there are so many variations. E, and he's got a short crossbar on his. And then he just continued it as a T. And same with, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but same with the FT. And then here's the HA. Now this one, he's doing the opposite of what we did. The A now comes across and it's this side that's slanted. And that's kind of like that M we looked at. And he brings the crossbar across. And we'll talk about words and using them. I'll show you some samples of ligatures in lines to make them fit. I have in various classes, not just Risa's. Risa's I really enjoyed because the focus was ligatures, but I have taken some other classes where you had ligatures for the fun of it. They just made some really nice, fun looking letters. So here's an H, and these are all and he brings the H and the E, and he has got serifs on them, and his E over here puts another serif on the H. So he's got those. A lot of times I leave serifs off I'm just showing them because you can use them however you're going to use them. And there's some chats. So Nan, will you let me know if anything comes up in the chats that I should cover? Okay. Otherwise I get distracted. Now you can see that Pedro's got this one, PS, and I have not seen this before, but a small P and a large S. I can't really talk about that too much. But this is the kind of thing you can do to save space. So there's saving space with ligatures, and there is doing it for interesting looks. KA, so here, this is more nesting. These K letters are more nests. He doesn't show those being ligatured to anything because it's got the big kick in front, where you would see the K ligatured is to another letter that has a straight side. So when we get to nesting, we'll talk more about those. And then he shows the MA, which is the opposite of the AM. Just you do your slant on the one side. Let me do this a little bit. I want less of a slant. When I'm being careful, I do have a small slant. So I can.
Kristi, could you move up a little bit, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So I did a small slant there, probably because it's with an A, which is usually slanted this way. I will do this slight slant. Here's my M. I'm going to go straight down because this side I'm going to ligature. So there's my slanted edge on the A, but a straight edge on where the two letters come together. Again, L's, these are all nested. You can see an L ligatured to a letter that has a straight back on it. These are all nested. And it does show these ligatures though. So the next line does have, so L, and then he just starts the A. No space in between the two.
So Kristi, on the nested letters, can you show what the third letter would be? Any example of what the following letter would be, how it'd be, the spacing on it?
Well, it would just be the same as a K, but I was going to address nesting separately, but let me just do this. So this one, I don't know, because he does them differently. I have not seen them done quite this way before, but let's do an A. And then I'd say you do it just similar to you would when you're writing regular Romans, because here's all this space made by, he made that big kick out, but he filled it with a letter. So I would say, and this isn't a word, but I wasn't thinking about making a word. There's another ligature that, so, but see how these two come together? That's how you would do a K and an L. So if I had just a K, a regular K, and then an L, they have a little bit of space in there because you've got all this. Let me just, you've got all this. So it's fairly close together. And so this is the same. It's got this bit of space. what I'm used to, when I saw historical examples, it was common to see like that C with an O inside, other letters, they're just inside. And so then you might space this a little further because normally you have to take into account that empty space in the middle of the C. And you don't have it now because you put that O there. Or if you did the O like this, you'll move that over. And I can talk more about those when I get on to some of the samples that we did in Risa's class, because we did do things like this and then we adjusted the spacing accordingly. So I will talk more about that. But is that
Thank you.
clear there, how that's done? It's
Clear-
similar?
Odd, because I'm not sure how you plan those words when you know that you're going to stack the letter. Plan the line, I guess, is what I mean to say.
You know what we did? We wrote it out and then we shortened it where needed. So I don't know. I did quite a few drafts to get mine short like
Mhm.
that, but I started out with a really long line and a fairly short line. So and I was learning ligatures, etc. But I don't think you're ever going to get it. Even Risa, who's been doing this for years and years, I don't think she's going to get it on her first take. You're going to do a pencil drawing of it before you do your final piece. And I think what I ended up doing in her class, because I would write it again, I put the new one, the old one I put up here, and then I have mine down here and adjust. But in the end, it didn't always work out. It should work out. Just for me, that it didn't. What I ended up doing was tracing the letters that worked really well and then adjusting. So I would trace some, and then where I knew I had too much space, I would move my bottom copy over and start tracing from there. So I will talk more about that when we get to that.
Thank
They're,
you.
they're in Risa's class, it's Zoom, and it's through the University of Riverside. And there were even people in there from other countries. I didn't know they would allow that, but they did. We had some Canadians in there, and it's they're it's older adult classes, and they're very well priced. And Risa really puts a lot into it, and she's quite. I say this. Affectionately, she's quite the slave driver. We really learn in there in her classes. I do recommend those to anybody. Any class you take with her, you'll feel guilty if you don't learn and work really hard in those. Okay, let me get on to, so let's do a few more of these L's, this second line of L's, and we will come back to nesting. And so, and I will really, when we talk about historical examples, is where I'll show a lot of the nesting examples, but I will also show some when we get to the stuff from Risa's class. And I took classes with Beth Lee. She's taught workshops for us, and we did some really fun ligatures and in her class also. All right, so LA, so there it is, just touching, and then he's just doing away with the space. But if you notice, he actually, because he's doing away with the space, that L to me looks a little bit longer, slightly longer. Here's his L on its own. There's a serif there. But if you look at just the L, the standard structure of an L is it's half of a square or slightly less. I'm using this UK technique, and theirs are slightly less than half. So his up here looks about half, but when you get down here, it's a little bit longer. So he's not totally eliminating the space. He's making that slightly longer. And then he puts his letter in there. And he does that with all of these. Let's just do just a little longer than I
Off
would.
screen, Kristi.
Oh, sorry. L, little bit longer, and then the D should be wider than I made it. And it seems to me when he's doing that kind of thing, you actually could just make a little gap in there. I think his are, I don't know that he's saving that much space because an L and a B would be very close together. I think it might be more for looks. He does teach, but he's South American. He's in Chile, and I don't know if he teaches in English, but I can imagine it would be very interesting to take a class with him. He is a typographer and that's very popular in South America. A lot of the younger people, especially, Pedro's been around for a long time, but a lot of the younger people there, the University of in Buenos Aires, they have a big typography program. See some very nice type coming out of there. All right, and so L, again, I would do it like that. But you have the option to bring that over and connect them. And sometimes for looks, it's just, you'll see where you want to do it. And you wouldn't do it with formal Romans. If you want them, you wouldn't do it with Trajan Romans, let's put it that way. But if you are doing something a little differently, that's where you can fit that in. And if you look at his, look how he really condensed that. So you could save space by just not adding extra. And let's just put an F there. And where you might not know by looking at this right now that that's an LF, when it's in the context of a word, you'll be able to read it. So he is saving space by eliminating that extra space. Some of his here looked wider. I think the LB, the LD, to me, they look a little wider, but he's getting pretty narrow here. Look at that LH, how narrow that is. He's saving space there. For some of these, I think it's more looks, but he is saving space on some of those. So let me just do his LH. He's just doing it very short. And his one LH, it's really short. And if you're doing any of the Sherry Thornton or type of fun word paintings, that's where this kind of thing could come in very handy. And then same LK. So what I do want to point out about the LK is he's got this, and then he's got this, but that K is not one of those big Ks you use with nesting. He is trying to save space, so that is a shorter K. And in fact, I'd say this came more in like that. Let me do that again. He made that even come out less than normal. So he's got a little bit narrower K, and he eliminated the space that would normally fall between an L and a K. Here's his LL. So similar to the T was that an FF? He continued that line across. So let's see, I'm doing 2 L's. And I'm just gonna come across. He makes the last one regular length. Mine's a little long, but he runs them together. So this is shorter. That should be slightly shorter, but it's not as short as this one. All right, I don't think I need to go through all of these, but if there's any in particular you want to see, but you can see LP, it's done the same way. This LR, he did those closer. He's showing that if you need to save more space, but you know, if you need to save that much space, I don't think I'd be kicking out the R that far. But maybe it's the end of a word and he had room, or the end of a line and he had room. And here's the LZ. And that, because you've got this extra space on the Z, you can really butt those two up. You've got all this space, extra space in there from the Z, plus all the space on the L. So you can really push those together. And I could even make this L shorter, which I will do that. And if I really need to save space, he made a smaller Z. And you look at different Romans exemplars, and there are narrow Z's and wider Z's. So we want to save space. We're going to use a narrower Z. Again, this would not be on a formal Trajan because there is that structure for a formal Trajan. And if you suddenly had a narrower Z, it would not look right. But if you were doing less formal lettering, especially if you're doing the kind of Romans they had in the Colosseum, you can take liberties. And they can be very fun. All right, so here's the R that's nested just like the K, except if you look, this K, he's showing you where he kicked those way out, but the R, he's not kicking quite as far out. So just showing you how, and look at that little P. He's just nesting these letters in there. Look at that. I guess that's a Q. Isn't that interesting? And here's a different Q. Yeah, PQ. And here's a different Q. So you make it fit for whatever your use is. And then here we get into the S's. So let me do an S here. And then he extends his S a little further, and then he does an H. So while he has spacing in there, he's just condensed that spacing. And in fact, he made a smaller H. So I'm going to do that. Just a narrower H. And it shows the same thing here with the K. And then it shows this SS. So I'm trying to think. I have not seen that used, but I will have to play around with that. I think we could come up with some examples where that would be a space saver, but you know, it has to be in the right place. And maybe that could be nested, that small SS, possibly nested. But what he's doing in that SS, let's do it at full size. is he, let's see if I can, he had this come around and touch. So he moves them in even closer. So here's your S. And then here's your second S. And you just, well, that's pretty bad S, but you get rid of your spacing in there. And it's touching. Okay, you see the ST. And I guess I will make a narrower T. The T is a pretty wide letter, but because we are trying to save space, it's not quite as wide. And here's the SY. And Y is another one. Sometimes you see it really wide, and sometimes it's not quite as wide. And if we're trying to save space, then we're not going to make it super wide. And here's another SS where he makes, and this is obviously a less formal use. He made this shorter. And he's got a serif on his, but I'm just doing the skeleton where it actually touches. It's it could be a little higher. I think they look about the same height here, but it could be slightly higher because it's obviously informal, and this comes below the line. I have it on the line. His actually comes below. Let me grab another piece of paper. Let me do it up here. S. I want to make sure I'm not hiding what I'm doing with my hand. Okay, so I'm going to do this up here. I'm going to come below the line slightly. That's an ugly S. Let me do it again. Slightly below the line. And this one I will do on the line. And I would say you would do a skinnier S. This is more a standard S. I would think these are somewhat thinner S's. You're trying to save space, so you may as well make narrower letters too. Okay, the T. Now I'm going to grab another piece of paper. Get my, let's see, oh, I've got this right here.
Kristi, were you doing your ligatures just with Romans, or did you do it with Visigothic as well?
With Risa's class, it was Visigothic, but
Yes.
and when I showed this one, I saw that originally with italic, and I loved it. But it was smaller case. It was not the capitals. It was lowercase, and I just loved the way that looked. And I think next time we cover ligatures, I'll show that copy. Let me just make a note here. Just circle it so I'll remember to do that. All right. I'm showing them with Romans because this is a Roman study group, but you could do these with many hands. And you, as I said, not so much with formal Trajan Romans. I'm sure there are examples out there, but you wouldn't see it as much. It's more other styles that you would want to fit this in. All right, let's see. Next, I'm gonna do some of the T's. I'm gonna cover some of the nesting with the T's too. There are some ligatures mixed in with some nesting, so I'll talk about those. And thanks, Susan, for asking questions. It's great that we can answer them. Okay, so here's a T, and I'm doing a standard T. And then he does let me get my pen. So it shows better. There's a T. And then he does a serif on the bottom, and then his A is, and he's got a certain height that he's doing these at. So you wouldn't do one letter 3 squares high and one 2 squares high. You would come up with a height for your nested letters and make them that height. Normally, there are exceptions, but normally. I would love to see what else Pedro did, because if he did this exemplar, he probably did some really fun demos of this, but we unfortunately don't have that. And I think I will write to him and get more information. But as I said, this was really old and he's moved on, but I still think it'd be fun to write to him. Okay, and then the next one, he just nested. And what I find interesting is he's got a serif on the left side going down, and it's more going up on the right side. And then he's got the bottom. And then you do your E, which is the same height as the, and he does his shorter crossbars. I usually do them about the same width, and he's got his serif on there. So if you notice, the E sticks out. It's not completely enclosed within the T. Some of these Ks, they had the long kick, so they're completely enclosed. But if you're not making the crossbar too long, then they do stick out, like the R's. Some of the R's slightly stick out because it's not a huge kick out. So you make your nesting fit what you're doing. And if you're not going to make, I mean, you could occasionally have a really wide T, but normally you're going to have similar widths.
So
So
Kristi, I have a question.
Sure, sure.
Is there like a proportion that, I mean, is there a rule or anything, the proportion to that big letter and the small letter?
No, you're going to do what fits.
What fits?
So
Because
for this one, to me, let's say
Mhm.
I'm doing half quarter squares. I mean, quarter inch. I'm doing a quarter inch, and I'm doing 4 squares high.
Mhm.
Well, I'm making this one 3 squares high because that's what it looks to me like he's doing. But if you look up here, those aren't 3 squares high.
No.
Maybe 2 squares or even 1
Mhm.
square. It's whatever fits.
Right. And
So
I understand this is also to use in a word, right?
yes, within
This
a
ligature
word. Yes.
within a word.
Because they aren't of much use if you're, I mean, they would be within a word.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'll show some. It could be at the start or the end of a word, but they are part of a word. You're saving space in a line.
Okay.
And
Okay,
you know,
got it.
you might have seen like business cards or logos. I know
Mhm.
it just comes to my mind where I have seen an old business sign where they put the O inside the C. And so I think they did
Right,
it
right.
as a fun touch, but it would also save room on their sign. So it just, you know, it was, let's say Acme Company, then it would, you know, it's just a fun way to do the company. And you'd put
I
a
like
period
that.
in there, I think. Yeah. Didn't you live on Acme Street? It seems
Yes,
like.
I
Okay.
good memory. Thank you. Mhm.
So, but if you notice, these are all similar heights, and then these are similar heights. But we'll cover other examples, and you will see there's always, you know, variations and challenges to every rule. Okay, TI. Let's do the TO. And notice this one is not on the line. These others are all on the line, but the O is not. And I made that T really wide, but his O kind of sticks out. And I think with O, you can just nest that in and it can float. I see that. And it looks fine there. So it's just something to consider. You could put it, it is near the line. So let's try one on the line. But see, it's just a different look. And you could, I think his, to me, his is about just about a half space less than his other letters. So it floats above the line, but not too far above the line. All right, and then this is an interesting one. The T and the R. And he's got a serif there. I'm doing his, but I leave them off of mine. And I would say his T is a shorter T than mine. Let's say his T is about there, and then he's got his R. And what I really can see here, to me, it looks like, well, it's just a thicker stroke. I'm doing skeletons. He's got a thicker stroke there. And then here's his nested R. And so this is ligatured and this is nested. And I don't know, if you really needed to save a lot of space, this ligatured R would really save the most space. They're both readable. I think normally we would see something like that, but that's readable. Susan, did you take that Visigothic versals? Did you study that at all?
I've done it independently.
Okay, yeah. So
And
that's
I was going to point out that Ben Sean used ligatures in his lettering all the time.
yeah, that's
I-
where Beth Lee, that's where I learned those with
Yeah,
her.
so
A
that's
lot of fun.
another source for people to look at. And
Okay.
actually, when you're lettering, it just becomes automatic. So
Okay.
sometimes Risa is very particular with the Visigothic and laying everything out. But it's a different letter form as well,
Yeah.
too. So maybe that's why.
Well, you know why it is? Because hers are justified left and right. And
Yeah.
Ben Sean's, I don't think his were. His stuff was much more informal. Where
Yeah.
Risa's was, it had to be lined up. So
And then at the bottom of the page, he's included some uncials, and that's something that you can combine, like an uncial E and a regular E. So
Yeah.
you can maybe look at that as well too, as the
Yeah.
combo of those letter forms.
yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And one thing Risa would do, here's an uncial E, and here's your T. She would put it as part of the stroke. And we'll get into that more. Thank you for pointing that out. So you'll hear different trains of thoughts on the E. Let's say you've got this E, and then you've got this E. You hear some people say you never use different E's in a line. And then another teacher will say, it's too boring. You always use a different E. So it depends what you're working on and the effect you're going after. All right. Let's see. Let's cover just a few more things because we are passing time here. Okay, so T's, there's a Z where it's pushed in real far, and then there's a T where it just the crossbar is ligatured. So two different ways. This is more nested. And I think it's just the copy it looks to me like there is a space in there, a slight small space between that serif and that Z. But that's really pushed in there, and it saves a lot more space than this ligature does. So it just depends on your use. Again, like that F where the crossbar was shared, there's a T sharing the crossbar. And here, let me show one the. There are quite a few we went through in Risa's class, but this, I'm just going to use this one to start. Here's H, TH is ligatured, and then you put the E. I think you can read that. It's one Risa really frowned on, so you have to be very careful. But in this case, I can read that. It just, you have to play around with it. There were some others, though, that didn't work out too well. Some other the ligature styles, which we can go over later. But this one, I think it's one of the few 3 letters that actually looked okay if you really have to. Another thing we did with some of these to save space is, let's say you're doing you end a word with, let's say, L, and then you start the next one with an M. I'm just gonna, this is one example. I haven't thought it out real careful. You might do a small the. And that's in space, rather than taking all that space to do that the at full size, even that ligatured version, you could just do a smaller the, because the is not a key primary important word. So you could make that one smaller. There are many things we can do. We will only touch on some of them tonight. But there,
And Kristi, it's sometimes the context
yes.
that allows you to have them slightly illegible because you would read that word anyway.
Yes, yes. And some of them we did in Risa's class, they weren't all that legible, and she really frowned on those. So it just was kind of fun to see all the variations and what worked. And sometimes this one didn't work. Here I can read it, but sometimes it didn't work. And many of the 3 in a row ligatures just made it less easy to read. You just have to play around. Okay, let's talk about the U's. I don't have to draw all of them. So there's this U. And there's this U. I think for ligaturing, this one often works better because you're butting 2 strokes up here. But, you know, sometimes you might want to use this one. So here's the U, A, and this one just shows, okay, it's the flat, and here you go. It should be a little wider than that, but there's one. Either a little wider or this comes out a little further. And then there's the U, B. Well, that's a bad B, but anyway, you get the picture. U, E, U, F, U, H, U, K, and I think the UL depends, as Margaret talked about, it just depends on the context, how readable that's going to be. Let's see, what you have the word alumni, I guess. Let's just talk about that one. Let's see. So I write this. By the time you would finish this word, you're going to be able to read that. But do you like the way it looks? I think I would push these 2 together closer. There's too much space in there. We're trying to save space, but you got to write it out and say, do I like that or do I not? Maybe you'd rather use a little more space and put it as a separate letter. So it's all in what fits where you're doing it and what goes with the styles you're using. Here's a UM with a straight on this side. You can make it more slanted on the other side, or you do this style that's more straight on both sides. UN, R, and this is a funny looking one. I think if I were doing UT, I would have the crossbar be shorter on the left side so that you have a little serif here, but he's coming way over. You know, it works, but personally, I do the shorter on the left side. So it's your call what works where you're going. And then here, this UZ, this is similar. We have the TZ. Well, this one, the Z is extending. Instead of the letter before it, the Z, the top, is extending. And it's forming a little serif there. It can, or you don't overlap and there would be no serif, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And then we did the AV. Well, the VA is pretty much the same. VY, now you got to be careful with that one. It looks a little like a W, but it's definitely is a VY. A WA, a WY. And then there's the bottom stroke of the Z is ligaturing with an A. An H. Here's the top with a Y. And that's what's funny is that's really reaching over there. That Y doesn't come out so far on this one. It's really reaching over there. But it's kind of like the A, we made it straighter on one side, or the M. And then one class I took, he said he never would close two. So here, let me demo what I mean. He would always leave a blank, and I don't remember who it was. It was recently. Some class I took, or some, but there'd always be an opening in there. So it's either going to be on the top or the bottom to make it more legible. Now this one, I could see that could be legible in context. This is one person's way. I think it maybe was Elmo when we took the class with Elmo. He never closes at top and bottom. And I kind of took that to heart. But then you see Pedro here, he's got two Z's. It works. So you would see what works for you.
Kristi, speaking to that, can you go back to the UZ in the prior line? That
Yes.
just does not look balanced.
Well, it does come way over. But you know what? This is Pedro. These are in his early years, 22 years ago. He's not that old of a guy. Look at that. That T is leaning backwards. So it's part of this, and this one too. Part of this is it's not perfectly neat. It's not perfectly drawn. So here's mine. I did what he did, but mine does not look quite like his does. Do you see that?
I do.
Because he is leaning backwards. So that's just a little bit of slight sloppiness in the drawing. I looked at this. You look at his work now. His work is, he's doing fonts and all. It's so, I mean, I can see why this isn't on his website anymore. It's a wonderful reference, but it's his work now is so far beyond this.
Mm.
So you just have to work it out for yourself. I just thought this was a nice example. I have some lists of things that work often as ligatures, but here was a picture and it had things that weren't on my list. And I didn't have a list of what works as nested. So I just thought this was the only exemplar I found that actually showed samples of exemplars. I mean, of ligatures. I did take a class with Gemma Black, but that's black letter, and that is so different. I took a biting the bows. Biting the bows, it was all ligatures in black letter, but very, very different than we'd use in Romans, etc. So I just Gwen sent me this, but you know, the other one I don't have right now that we can cover another night is, who was it? Gwen, another big calligrapher, and it's much more sophisticated work. Gwen sent that to me too, and I think I actually might have that book. I don't remember. It wasn't Zop, but it was somebody well known. And so we can review those another time. There's so much to cover on this, but that's more sophisticated. And so to me, I don't know. I just, a lot of his U's are leaning, like this one's leaning a little this way. Well, that's fine because the M is slanted, but the others are kind of leaning backwards, and that's just a drawing thing. Here's an ampersand, and you can see where the ET comes in. So that's what a ligature, an ampersand is, a ligature. Here's the E, and here is the T. And then you make all kinds of, there are so many fancy variations of ampersands, but that's what it's based on, ET. Okay, so we're kind of running out of time. I think the next, but I'll just give you a glance at some of these others. So this was, I don't want to put this person's address because not everybody is a member that signs up for these, but I wanted to show some of these ligatures that I did after the class with Beth Lee. I had so much fun after studying with her. And I just played with that on envelopes. I had to mail envelopes for various things. And so here's an A ligatured to an N, ligatured to an R. And then here, you know, down here, and they're obviously not straight A's. She looked at Ben Shaw's work and she came up with some monoline versions, and she played with them, and we stretched, they started out as Ben Shaw's as a reference. By the time we were done, they weren't necessarily Ben Shaw's. Some of these look a little bit like, I can't think of his name right now, but a European we studied. Yeah, did I? Yeah. So yes, it was a class with Beth Lee. And so she had different A's that she looked at, and then we just, here's an L, there's an A and an L, and you can read it because it's part of a word. And I put this on an envelope and sent it. Let's see, are there any others? Yeah. So just fun. And here's one where the R comes right up to the E. So I have a little break in there, but they could touch and be a ligature. And this person doesn't live here anymore, so I can show this. Here's a U and an E. And so here's Pedro's U and E. He made it very, very narrow. And for this one, I didn't make it quite as narrow, but some of these others I have narrow, tall, narrow letters. I think it's a fun look. And
Hey,
here,
Kristi, this is Pam. This
Yes.
is Pam.
uh-huh.
Some of these remind me of when they used to brand cattle.
Oh yeah, yeah. They,
So I think we could go and look at some of that stuff too to get some ideas.
you know, Marina Soria has a class that's based, she designed a whole alphabet based on Argentinian cattle brands.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And it's a really fun alphabet, and she did pieces based on it. And she would show us that and we'd play with them in one of her classes. But here's some nesting. There's the cow and the I is nested there. Here it's not. Here it is. So you can just play around with all. These were my rough drafts where I was playing, and then I addressed an envelope and sent it. I like to look at those because to me they were so fun. And let me do some quick, I'll show you some Risa Gettler. This is Risa's piece. I have my own piece too, but this is Risa's. And our whole thing was to right and left justify. And that's why we did so many rough drafts. Ben Sean, I'm not doing a lot of rough drafts, but for Risa's class, we had a final project that was due. But here's one. Look at that. That is a ligature. HO. We did a lot of those in Risa's class, and they're just fun, and they're uncial looking. Some of these letters are very fun. Here's the E nested on the, let me turn off the light because I think that's glaring. The E nested on the L. There's this one, well, I should say ligatured on the L stroke. This one, the I is nested inside of the D. And this is a fun hand, so you can see she's even got an upside down A in there. We didn't learn that in class, but it was so much fun playing with this. And here's an A and an R, and in this hand they didn't have crossbars. Sometimes we made them up and put them in to make it more readable, but the actual letter did not have a crossbar. Here's an R, and with the E nested above the bottom stroke. Here is an A and a W ligatured together. There's that O on the T. And there's an R nested inside. I think that's an O. And there's an O nested on an S. We nested O's all over the place in her class, and this was really fun. It was so much work, but it was fun to do. And I would take her classes all the time, but I don't have time to do all the work that's required, but you do really learn in those classes. So the other thing with this class with Risa and the Visigothic versals is we were looking for rhythm. So you are looking at those circles, and they should be, what we did a draft where we colored them in all the same color, and then we're looking for rhythm. We might color in the E's, all these shapes, the round shapes, rounded shapes, we colored them in, and they needed to be kind of evenly spread, not perfectly evenly, but balanced through the piece. So that was another thing we did in Risa's class.
Like the rhythm of the tango.
Yes, yes. Obviously, Margaret was in that class. So Risa did show us a tango and talked about this. So here's mine. And I actually, I didn't do a final draft on good paper, but this was my next to the final draft. And I just colored them in because I liked it. We had to do that as an exercise, but I liked it. And so I colored them in on my final draft too. And as you can see, they're pretty evenly spread. So if we had, maybe I had some letters, I needed to stretch out a line. And so I didn't have ligatures, but then Risa would say, you need that ligature, you need that small O for the rhythm. And so then I'd somehow have to stretch out that line some other way. So this was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. Do you agree, Margaret? Was it a lot of fun?
Yes, it was. But as you said, it was a lot of work. And if you didn't have the time to do the homework, you were in real strife.
Yeah, you were. Well, that's why I'm not taking more of her classes, but they are good. If you have the time, I recommend them. So, but I'll just quickly, we're at the end of our time, so I just quickly pointing out a few ligatures, but we'll talk more about the nesting and all that. Maybe in April. In March, we have Beth Lee is going to walk us through the built-up capitals. And I really enjoy her teaching. So I thought you would all enjoy it. And then we will also go over, in one of the sessions, we'll go over some historical examples, and you'll see more examples, and we'll do some more nesting, stacking, etc. Do I have any examples? I don't think I did that much stacking, but some people in this class did a lot of stacking. I don't think that I did, but we can talk about that too. So we're going to wrap up. Any other questions? I'm just gonna take this off. And
Hi,
turn this-
Kristi, it's Sonia. I
Yes.
just want to know what kind of lettering that was that you were showing us just now.
Oh,
is
that's Visigothic versals. So Risa went to Spain and studied this with a calligrapher in that part of the world. And and I was in Barcelona, and I had already I hadn't taken Risa's class, but I had seen her work, and I saw similar work in the museum in Barcelona, historic work. But her teacher did murals in his city on the sides of buildings, huge. It just was really fun, and I really wanted this class. And even though I knew how much work Risa gave us, I really wanted to learn this, so I signed up for that one, and I did
Well,
the work.
Yeah, it's a really cool letter style. I mean, I'd like to probably take something like that too.
Yeah, she
So-
actually would teach it for us. The thing is, let's see, her class that we took, we had like 5 weeks. Do you say, Margaret,
Yeah.
was it 5 weeks? And we thought we really could have used 6 weeks. So,
Oh, wow.
but you don't have to do it to that extent. She wanted a perfect piece that could go in an exhibit. We did
Yeah.
not, and her workshops usually are a couple days. So we definitely would like to do that. Any other
Yeah.
questions?
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions?
I just
Okay.
sent Veronica Phillips, who we've done versals with.
Yes.
You may want to look at what we did there, because I think it leads into working with ligatures, because she had the combination of those forms and may help people.
Yeah, I don't think she did versals, but we did the fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're actually gonna have Veronica teach a couple more classes, but they're not gonna be the same. We're gonna do some surface decoration and a book. We're gonna make a book covered with the paper we do with, but you know what? That one's probably in person. So let's see. And so any other questions before I'll check the chat. But yes, and you know what? I left Veronica's recording out there. So if anyone needs that, I could probably send that again. Let me make a note. You could always look at Veronica's thing again. Those are capitals. They're not ligatures, but they're the fun capitals that would work well
It
for
just lead,
this.
the letter forms lead to that. So
Yeah. Yes, they do. Okay, and then next month is Beth Lee's, and we can definitely include, you can use the ligatures with those that Beth will be teaching us.
Are you going to send out whatever you were just talking about to all of us?
Yeah, when I send out the recording, I can send out the links for Veronica's class
Thank
and
you.
handouts. Yeah, it was one of these study groups.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Anything else before we end?
Maybe we should all try one sentence like the quick brown fox and then put it on that site. Your site.
Okay, you know what? I mean, I don't have a site for this,
I
but
thought we
you're
had
talking
that.
about the Facebook group?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and you know what? We're gonna get Padlet also, so that we can use with these also, but we don't have it yet. I have to learn it. But we are gonna, Nan has learned it. She's already started using it for her classes, and I'm gonna learn it this month. So, yeah, Jenny, if you want to give everybody homework, we all learn by doing homework. So Jenny suggests we all do the quick brown fox, jumps over the lazy dog. So if you want to, you can do that. I'll call that Jenny's homework. But that is a very good idea, because you don't learn these till you actually do them. And they are so
Right.
much fun.
Right.
Heads
'cause
up, it was World Pangram Day yesterday, February 1st. And we
Yes.
submitted pangrams to Let's Letter Together. So mid-month, they'll be announcing the winners. So there'll be new selection of pangrams to do beside the old box.
I saw some posted. I saw Carol Dubois posted, and so great. That's
Yeah,
great.
so it's a good idea, Jenny.
Well, I thought it was kind of fun after seeing what Risa did, that Kristi just showed. Now I understand how she incorporates it with the Visigoth,
Yeah,
But-
and the Beth Lee. I just love doing the Beth Lee on envelopes or anything. So all of those. Okay, so with that, we'll end the class, and once I get the recording, I will send it out. You never know how long it's going to take for the recording, but once it's ready, I'll send it.
Thank
Thank
you again,
you.
Christy. Great
Yeah.
job.
Thanks,
Have a
Kristi.
great
Thanks,
day.
Dan. Bye,
Great job.
everybody.
Have a
Thanks,
great
Kristi.
Bye,
month.
everyone.
Bye.
Great as always.
Bye, Susan.
Bye.
Bye, Susan.